So I'm presenting this on behalf of the entire steering committee, any of whom probably could have done a better job with the presentation. So, but this, so, as I think you know, this registry really came as a direct result of the issues with the epidemiological studies at Huntersville, and this came from a lot of the work that Dr. Orloff has been doing and so forth. And I think it's actually grown kind of beyond that now in a good way. Everything we're doing comes back to patients. This is a patient of mine who, she actually got one of the Courage Awards at one of the MRF events, but she passed away from disease last summer after a 10-year battle. But I bring her up, and I just, listening to, the patients and family members, what do we hear? We hear that, we need hope, We hear that you want to be involved with advocacy, right? You want to advocate for the cause. We hear that, you want to build community. You want to build partnerships and collaboration and, all of the stuff, support, research, and so forth. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. My hope is that the development of this registry is one way that you guys can do it if at least give this an option for you to help move this forward. So the Cure-OM patient-powered registry, the overall objective of this effort is really to build, importantly, a patient-developed and a patient-led registry of prospectively collected real-world data. I don't really have to read this, I guess, but that can be utilized by all stakeholders to generate the real-world evidence necessary to improve outcomes. And I just want to go through some of the components of that because that's important. Like what is a registry? Initially, if you had asked me what is a registry, how long will this take to make 5 years ago, I said, well, we'll just, make some website, an Excel file, and people just enter in data. It's got to be really easy. It's not that easy. But really, it has to be an organized system. We have to, do this in a methodologically, appropriate way. We have to make sure we're collecting important data in a unified fashion so it's all useful, okay? And so that actually generating that data dictionary takes a lot of time. Another aspect of what we're trying to do is make sure that all the key stakeholders are involved if they want to be and can benefit from this. And so who are our stakeholders? Well, one, it's you guys. Two, it is the clinicians and the researchers. We want to make this data set helpful to advance the field. We want to make this useful for industry, okay? Because ultimately we need new treatments, and they're the ones who are going to be developing this for us. We want this to be useful potentially to what I call the regulatory authorities, the FDA, right? If they can use this to help accelerate the drug approval process, that'll be good for all of us. And we also want this to potentially be useful for the payers, which are the insurance companies, right? How should they determine what should be covered, what works, what you feel is valuable in terms of your care? And the last piece is this real-world evidence thing, which is also another term that 5 years ago I wouldn't have known much about, but this is a really huge field. That is, when you think about research, you think about things that are done in the laboratory, or you think about these clinical trials that you do where you generate data sets in very kind of confined criteria or a situation. But you can imagine there's all this real-world data that's there based upon drug utilization or insurance billing and things like that. That's real-world data that we can kind of look at and maybe try to learn something from that as well. And so real-world data is data relating to patient health status and or the delivery of health care. And this can come from the medical record, it can come from insurance claims, it can come from Fitbits. You can think of, that's real-world data. And you can't see it, but there are all these categories of real-world data, like clinical data that can come from the medical records, or like medication data that can come from the pharmacies, or claims data from insurance companies. Some of the data is best coming from probably the clinicians, the doctors, right? Frankly, you can definitely, get a path report and try to transcribe stuff, but, maybe that's easier for me to do, for instance. But there's some data lifestyle, patient preferences, how you're feeling, family history, where you've lived, Where have you worked? What are your potential exposures? That's much better to come from you guys. I can ask, but right, it's much better if you guys directly enter that. And so a patient-powered registry, what is it? One, it's something, really the point of this is to focus research more directly upon the patient's and family member needs. And this is something, a concept that's been around since the 90s. And the registries are different from what we call researcher-generated registries, and that the registry, the research, it's all managed by patients and family members and disease advocacy organizations. So that's what we're talking about here. There is an emerging emphasis upon the utility of these data. Okay, so this is something that the National Institutes of Health believes is important. More recently, these are publications by the Food and Drug Administration saying that we have to incorporate real-world evidence, including patient-derived data, okay, into the drug development process, right? So this is just December of last year, and just like this is still last month, right? So this is all really new. And the bottom line is the FDA is saying this is important. We should figure out how to use it. There's very little guidance, actually, how we're supposed to use it, so it's still a moving target. But I think the fact that it's acknowledged that it's important is a big deal. Okay, so why do we want a patient-derived registry? What are we going to get out of this? One is it's going to be a huge data source that the way we're going to do it, I believe, is that it's going to be something that's really shared. You guys lead this, you guys build this. The data we collect will be available for anyone who can help us in trying to cure this disease. Two, the data will be directly from you. This is your data set. You're going to own it. You're going to figure out, you're going to help us decide what data should be in there. You decide how it should be used. Three, the data can be entered, it'll be web-based, so you can enter this from anywhere, which means that actually this is a nice tool to really bring the whole community together, not just in the US, but ultimately internationally. At least the possibility is there, okay? So again, community, that's really important. This is one way to do that. Next, we want to use this as a tool to enhance patient education and the understanding of disease. And so, we had kind of a working group meeting yesterday. And part of the issue for us is how are we going to make this actually of use individually to you? Why are you going to spend all this time putting in data, even if it's an hour, every 6 months? Why are you going to do that? And so there's definitely going to be an emphasis to make this useful for you guys. And somehow, there'll be educational pieces to this. You'll get a sense of, what have other people entered in? Where do you fit into kind of a larger community? Okay. We want this to act as a vehicle for the patient community voice. I think a lot of what we hear is you guys want to help us, in this research. It is a team, and this is one way for you guys to do it. We want you to be able to relate, compare, and learn from other patients' journeys. And again, we want you to further understand your condition, help you be more active in the community if you want to be so. This is also going to be helpful for research. Again, we're going to share the data. This will be a really powerful source of real-world data, okay? This can act as a single source of information that can really record the entire journey of patients, which does not exist now, right? We want to know how many patients actually have this disease. We don't know. That we want to figure out, but there are other aspects of the journey that I think we need to know, and we don't know that now. We want to document how does care differ, right? State to state, region to region, country to country, and does that affect outcomes? This is a rare disease for which we have very little data to help tell us this is the best way to manage patients. And so this way we can actually kind of compare. It's like, oh, in Ireland, this is what they do, and things are really good, versus, it's hypothesis generating, but it's important data. Patient preferences is really important. What's important to you guys, and how can we help that happen, right? We have a sense of what patient preferences are. My assumption is that typically that, I'm sure you want to save your eye, so we're just going to do plaque. But that's not universally true, right? It's not really documented, right? We want to be able to support health and social services planning, post-marketing surveillance for drugs that are approved. And I added, we also want to demonstrate value, and value is a very subjective thing that's becoming of increasing importance, right? Like, what is valuable? What's a valuable treatment? And that doesn't just come from us, that comes from you guys. From us, to get a drug approved, we have to show that, something, works and that it's safe. But for the payers, for the insurance companies, they have to know what the value is. If it works, if it's safe, but maybe with some toxicities, what is the value to you guys? If you guys say this is a high value thing, then insurance is more likely to cover it. And we can help try to generate some of that data with this. And so, so the thing that I was going to get tomatoes thrown at was this slide, was this one here. Why do we need randomized trials, right, to answer the question? Why are we going to randomize patients to chemotherapy, which doesn't tend to work very well? And the answer is, to convince the Food and Drug Administration that something works, that's just what has to happen, okay? Now, more and more, they're open, right, to saying, well, maybe we can change things so we don't have to randomize things as much. And so that's why here in this study, we're randomizing of every 3 patients, 2 get the drug and 1 get something else, right? But also, if you look up top, which is a non-randomized trial, that's where every patient gets the drug. What the FDA has allowed us to do is say, well, even though it's not randomized, you can look at a data set that might already be in existence or one that you're trying to create and just see how those patients did, and maybe that's your comparison. And they're open to that idea. Again, it's not quite clear how that comparison's going to be done, and they don't tell you, oh, if you use this comparison group and your drug shows this, then we'll approve. The guidance is nowhere near that concrete, but the idea is there. And so, in fact, for that first trial, it's built like that. And it's going to be compared to a couple of things. One, a prior retrospective data set of 1,000 patients that we previously put together, and then this ongoing academic registry that we've been working on also for 3 years that will launch very soon, right? But so there's a way to use these data to make the trials better for you guys. So the registry timeline. So this all started in March of 2016. Which meeting was that? Atlanta. So that was in Atlanta. That's when the Cure OM Unite campaign launched. And that's 3 years ago now, right? And of course, what have we done in 3 years? And it turns out it's kind of like the clinical trial thing. You think it should just be easy, and it's not. but in that time, a lot has been accomplished. Jacqueline Kraska, who's here, was hired as a registry expert consultant. This is not something that any of us really have ever thought about doing. So we need someone who knows that. And Jackie has been absolutely fantastic. We also formed an interdisciplinary steering committee, including patient advocates, patient family members, clinicians, to just try to figure out how to make this happen. And in March of 2017, we had the first in-person steering working group meeting to kind of just set goals and figure out what the steps were going to be. Surveys were sent out to the stakeholders to see what they thought we should do, how they should be built. And over this period of time, a number of different technology platforms were kind of looked at and vetted, and some pursued for like a long time actually. To see, it's like what platform are we going to use? What's it going to look like? How easy is it going to be to enter in data? How friendly would they be to kind of a patient advocacy organization? How easy would it be to work with them? And so a number were vetted. The registry objectives and protocol was formalized. In November of last year, we formally presented this to the Scientific Advisory Committee of the MRF, because ultimately we need their approval for this. Throughout this time, funding has been sought after. And yesterday we had the second in-person steering committee working group meeting. So there has been a lot done, and very, very shortly, I think there'll be kind of a really amazing transformative, or announcement about transformative funding opportunity, vision, a logo, the name of this. So we're really close. This is the steering committee as it stands now. It's really, it's really led by Sarah and Jackie and the patient and family advocates. There's a lot of supporting staff here, including Marlana and myself, Dr. Matarin, who's been here, as well as several other folks who I bet you guys know. We have representatives from nursing, social work, and more recently we added some biostatistical expertise in something called patient-reported outcomes and expertise in epidemiology. So it really has been a really nice kind of collaborative, multidisciplinary effort. Overall objectives: want to develop and utilize a standardized global patient reporting online registry to look at incidence, prevalence, demographics, risk factors, all the things you'd think we want to look at. 2, we want to provide patient-centered data to enhance the care of patients with this disease. 3, facilitate collaboration. And 4, ultimately, we do want to develop a virtual biospecimen repository also, because the tissue is really important for us to make advances here. Basically, we're going to include anyone with a patient of ocular melanoma, whether it be uveal or conjunctival. The plan is to start in the US, but there's already been a lot of conversations with international partners, including Nigel and others. So the experience, there are going to be a lot of pieces to this. A large part of what has been done, and there'll be more emphasis in the near future, is continuing to engage you guys. It's really important. I think you've heard a lot about this for a long time, and the updates maybe have not been as robust as we'd like them to be. There has been a lot of work in the background, but that engagement is really going to become a major emphasis now that launch is kind of imminent. There'll be a registration process. There'll be a consenting process. Online, you'll be able to complete your profile, which will be a longitudinal thing. And so it'd be great to have your input about how much time actually are you willing to spend to this, because that in part will depend on tell us how to build this thing. And then ultimately, we'll be creating knowledge for you and for the field. So recent accomplishments, we've added new disciplines to the team, including biostats, epi, and patient-reported outcomes. Fundings, these things are so expensive. I won't talk about numbers, I guess, but it's so expensive. It's just really expensive. And that funding discussions are continuing. We have actually presented this, engaged stakeholders at a number of international meetings. So at least in the scientific and medical community, there's a lot of awareness about this and a lot of support about this. One question that we get a lot is, and in fact, Dan Gombos, who's on the steering committee, he's at MD Anderson, so he presented this at this meeting called the International Society of Ocular Oncology. So it's every 2 years. And they love they love it. They loved it. But there were so many questions about why do we need this registry and our registry? Or we have all these other registries going on. Why can't we just build one? And that's a great question, right? Wouldn't it be great to just have one international registry that captures everything for us? And the fact is, for a lot of reasons, it's just not going to happen because the registries have to be built for the purpose that it's designed for, okay? And so, this registry is really being built for you guys to focus on the patient experience, patient-reported outcomes. If you look at some of the other registries, and Dr. Brennan is here, the IRIS registry, and he was a past president of the American Academy of Ophthalmology, and they have a registry called the IRIS registry, and that is really a great registry that links directly to the electronic medical records, okay? And it's very good at pulling, I'm sure I'm going to say stuff that's wrong, Mike, but it's really based on electronic medical records. It's good at extracting billing data, drug use data, things like that, but it's not a curated data set. There are going to be inaccuracies there, and basically, if I don't put something in the EMR, it's just not going to be there, right? So if we thought, oh, well, we want to know, if Mrs. X lived in Huntersville from year to year, it's not going to be in there, right? Because it's just not in the electronic medical records. Some of the registries are really built to answer very specific scientific questions. And so Miguel was talking about, or someone was talking about this COOG-2 registry, which is a really nice collaborative effort. That one's specifically designed to look at characteristics of the primary tumor and genetic factors and outcomes. It's going to look at PRAME and all of those things. That's what it was designed to do. That's it. okay? And then we have this academic registry, which we hope to launch by this summer, which will be basically also capturing the longitudinal experience of patients with this disease, but from the medical perspective. So it'll be kind of like the technical things will be kind of plugged in. Now, although we have separate registries, the good thing is that we all talk to each other, so we know what those registries are. And so whenever there are opportunities, we can combine and merge data sets and make sure that we can kind of build off of what other groups are doing. And so, if we look at the patient registry and some of the things that are going to be collected, like, quality of life and patient preferences and exposures, that stuff is not going to be collected in the academic registry, right? But you can imagine if a patient is on the academic registry as well as a CURE-OM one, and if you give us permission, we can combine the data sets for analysis. So that's ultimately what we're going to try to do. So our next steps, one, we're going to confirm the technology partner. That's going to happen pretty soon. Two, we need to know what questions we're going to ask. So that's what we spent all day about yesterday, and we're close. We're close. Three, we'll build a platform. Four, we're going to get regulatory approval. We're going to continue outreach, education, and fundraising to make this a sustainable effort. And then there will be the launch. So these are just a couple of pictures from some of the steering group meetings that we had. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, happy to take questions for Dr. Carvajal or anyone on the panel.
Hi, I just have a very simple question, just having to do with security in terms of entering the data, so that you can be certain that people who are, the data that's coming in is in fact people you want to get data from.
So we actually talked about that yesterday. So, we're not the first people to do this type of registry. This patient-reported registry. And yes, obviously, it's a bit on the honor system. You want people who actually have the diagnosis of this disease to be the ones that are entering the data. Why somebody without ocular melanoma would want to register themselves in the ocular melanoma registry, I don't know, but I'm sure there's people out there. We are talking about potentially having to upload in some shape or form some sort of document that just says, I was diagnosed, whether it ends up being a simple letter from either your medical oncologist, primary care doctor, diagnosing ocular oncologist, or somebody saying, yes, this person was diagnosed. We talked back and forth about whether or not that document should have basic information about the tumor. Most of you guys actually know a lot about your primary tumors, and certainly your subsequent course. But we are talking about potentially having to upload something. The thing is, we don't want this to be cumbersome. We don't want a barrier to people participating have to do with, I don't have the ability to do X, or just time. So we're really trying to, and fortunately we have some great patient advocates on our committee to try to figure out, okay, what can we do that gets good data, because we don't want to do this and it all be junk and we can't make anything of it. But we also don't want it to be so cumbersome that people don't participate.
I just wanted to make a comment in terms of funding. And, from the MRF perspective, this is a huge undertaking. And, for us as an organization, what we want is we want data for years and years and years to come. And we want to build it the right way. So I think, we're so grateful to the steering committee for their hard work over the years. And that's, why we brought Jackie on to be our expert in this area. As an organization, we're not a registry expert, so there was a lot of learning and a lot of, information gathering, and to do this the right way, to serve the community in the best way possible. So we're very excited that we're going to be very close to launch and sharing a big announcement with the community to come. But I would just like to applaud the steering committee and Sarah and all the experts and patients in the room who have been steadfast behind this effort for so many years while we put it together.
I'm supposed to ask you how long, but I think that question might get shunted back my way. So the answer that I will give you is that, unless any of you want to take the question, I thought it was coming back my way. So this can't happen fast enough for any of us. We all feel, the need for research to happen at lightning speed. And we want to make sure, I think you've heard us say multiple times, that we also want to do it right. Because we could do it fast, and then in 5 years have no data that helps anybody, and then I think we're worse off. So we're trying to balance going as quickly as we can with being as comprehensive and mindful as we can. And also, as Kylie said, making sure we have the funding not just for this year, but for next year and the next year and the next year, because we don't want to commit to something that we can't finish. And so we're balancing all of those competing priorities, working as quickly as we can. And I think Rich sort of outlined the next steps. We've made a lot of progress over this year, and I think we're going to make a lot of progress in the coming months, and you'll be hearing from us soon with some new exciting announcements that are really going to push us forward. Thank you.
I know that you'll be using this probably for trend analysis, and I was wondering, when you're building the questions, have you considered putting in like an X factor question where someone can put something in that may be unique that happened to them? And I'll give you an example of, like, for my wife, she went on a dependence cruise on a nuclear submarine. She thought she one time had looked at an eclipse. Things that maybe happen to someone that maybe they don't know if it matters or not, but you can collect the data, and if it results in nothing, then you have that data anyways, but it could create a trend that we didn't even know to look for.
Yeah, so we are doing our best, and we spent how many hours yesterday? Many hours yesterday, going through every element and saying, okay, what's the question and what are going to be the possible answers? Because in order to build a good registry that you could easily go back and interrogate, ask questions, the data needs to be consistent. So ideally, everything is a drop down, click, radio button, click. We understand, though, that not everything is able to be put in that format. So we are, in certain areas, going to have a free text. It is very hard to go back and make sense of free text, but exactly to your point, we said the same exact thing. We said, okay, well, for certain questions, by having the free text, it's going to be somewhat difficult to go back through, but if we start seeing a similar free text, for any answer, whether it's what do you think caused your eye melanoma, or what kind of treatment you had, or anything, what's your occupation, then that may be something that then we need to make a button for, moving forward, or something that we need to look at further. So exactly. So once this is launched, you all will have a job to do. As you saw, we need 400 patients per year, hopefully 1,200 patients for the first 3 years. So we're going to need all of you to go on to tell your friends. Obviously, your friends with ocular melanoma, not just all your friends, but and we're going to need you to fill it out, and to be honest, and to fill it out, as much as you can. And if there is a free text area, and your answer doesn't fit one of the pre-selected options, feel free to put it in, because we're going to be learning certainly along the way.
For those who have already passed, is their family able to enter all of that data?
Yeah, so when you first log in, there's going to be an option to fill it out as the patient or as a caregiver or an alternative. And we actually talked yesterday about, when you first log in, there's going to be potentially a contact info section where it's, the person filling out the form. There's also patient information, and then also an alternative contact. Should the patient, maybe the patient starts out filling it out, and then there's a point in time where they can't, then we have permission to contact your alternative contact to fill it out. Because we really want the full journey.
Is there anything built into it to prevent insurance companies from using the information to not pay?
Well,
I think ultimately the sponsor, which is the MRF, gets to decide who they share the data with. That's what it comes down to. So the data isn't just going to be freely available, okay? So at any time and point in time, once we start collecting data and it's accumulated, we make sure that it's safe, we make sure that it's quality data, and there be different mechanisms in order to ensure that, okay? Once we start analyzing the data, and then it's determined that it's, we can share it, there has to be requests that come into, we were talking about this yesterday as well, how best do we do this, okay? So there probably will be some sort of governing committee, if you'd like, that would accept requests in order to, be able to see, maybe perhaps to do some analysis on the data themselves. Obviously, it'll all be anonymous data. None of it's going to be any data that has any identifiable material in it. That is something that we will be looking at when we create the data set and making sure that works within the registry system. So, and all the registry itself obviously will be compliant with all the regulations around data safety. It has to be. That's an absolute imperative. So ultimately, again, it is up to the sponsor. And again, that will be in a multidisciplinary community that's thinking about all the parties involved in making sure before that data is shared that you're fitting the criteria that allows that data to be shared.
Yeah, and Jackie said this, but I just want to pull out and emphasize it, that no identified data will be shared. So there's no data that would be attached to any one individual that would ever be shared outside of this database. It's HIPAA compliant, et cetera. And the technology provider we're going with has been running registries in the pharmaceutical industry, which has, very extreme, intense guidelines, and they've been following these for several decades now. And so we've really vetted them, and we really trust them for the security piece. I mean, that's really been like our number one priority, is the security piece. And then can they do what we want them to do with the data? But the data security has been our number one priority when looking at the providers.
I'm probably starting to slightly doubt my ability to fill in a long questionnaire. Would it be possible, will there be an option where I could give you permission to contact Wills or Thomas Jefferson to fill in things accurately for my record?
That we can definitely do that. I mean, we talked about that again yesterday. Okay, so again, the technology is built in a way you can kind of be innovative and do whatever you like to a degree, and that is obviously a consideration. We've talked about, different parties, as Rich had mentioned earlier, that, there's some data that maybe isn't best reported from the patient or legal authorized representative. It may be best sitting with a clinician. And what happens in these technology providers, there's like a portal, if you'd like, that can allow patients go in and put their data. Perhaps if you decide at one point it makes more sense for perhaps the care team or your clinical team to input that data, you can have a portal for them to do that. And again, there's high security around doing that. It's not just anyone can kind of go in. It has to be set up, has to be regulated, things like that. But, it is something we talked about. It is something that we need to consider when we're designing the platform, which we have, and we have talked about that with the platform provider. So the ability is definitely there. We just have to decide at what point, how exactly are we going to do that? We also talked about being able to print off perhaps, the surveys and being able to administer them in different ways and things like that, knowing that perhaps not everybody is going to want to be able to do that online. So we have to make sure we're capturing the whole community. How do we do that? So
Would those institutions, particularly Wills and Jefferson, be willing to fill out a lot of questionnaires?
Well, that's another thing. Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're collaborating. That's why you got to think about the resources and what's behind that as well. So, we're having those conversations. Another idea was that perhaps we create a form that has those. I mean, there's going to be certain data in this registry that's going to be, if you'd like, mandatory. We need it. In order to achieve your objectives, we actually need it. So we can mark certain data fields and say that's mandatory. And maybe what we will have is a form. Someone brought this up. It was a great idea, actually. Yeah, you brought it up. There we go. It was a great idea yesterday. Have a form of those particular imperative points of data that we really need. Maybe it's something that the patient can print off and register, or maybe we can mail it to them. And then basically they can take it to Jefferson or whomever and say, okay, well, I really need this. Can you help me just filling these bits? Then go back, input himself, or maybe it's mailing back to us and we have to input it or something. All these type of things we can do. Whatever's best for the community, that's what it comes down to. Whatever works for the community is what we'll do. But the ability and capability is there to do it, which is great with these platforms. And that's what we've made sure this platform provider is basically, what do you want? What do you need? What does your community need? We'll build it, which is what we're doing.
questions?
Will the patients participating or the patient body in general have access to the results or the data from the registry? In general? Like
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Chad, you answer.
There you go.
So that's a tricky question, but yes, from a non-research perspective, so looking at very basic things that a lot of the community may have a question to, it may not be significant, but you may want to know male versus female, right eye versus left eye, size of tumor. So some very basic information, yes, but I would say it'll mostly be graphs and charts or something along those lines. So it could be very empowering and useful for the patient community to know, but from a research perspective, it may not provide much value. But I would say, yes, the intent is, upon fully completing the survey, we intend on providing some feedback back to the patient. And along with that, some of the other questions that came up when we were meeting yesterday is, even something as simple as patients that are alive or patients that are not alive. I mean, there's a lot of challenging aspects that we have to take very carefully in aspect as registry. How do we know how many people are passing away, unfortunately, a year? There seem like very simple questions, but this registry can help us get an understanding of truly what our community is like as a whole, not narrowed down into an academic center, which is mostly where the patients are being seen, right? So there's some very big questions to be answered with this registry that are not easy to answer in a smaller setting.
And just to add on to what Chad was saying, that we can kind of create this dashboard, if you will, which I think is what you were describing, Chad, that would be sort of like giving data back in real time to patients as they're entering their data, and see how, you compare to the rest of the patients in the registry. But some additional things that we'll do, so we'll probably have a regular report, hopefully like an annual report that we'll be presenting on like basic data fields, et cetera. And then, as Rich talked about, we want to have this be an open database. So it's not going to be open that just like anyone on the corner can like go right on in. We're going to have a transparent governance body. But basically, we want anyone who wants to do research to present that proposal to the governance body. And we haven't sort of set out all the details of the data sharing agreement, but it will be something along those lines. And hopefully some of those research teams who are asking questions and writing proposals will be interdisciplinary research teams that may include patients on them as well. And so that would be another way, thinking about research and patients involved with research, and the reporting that we'll be able to give data back to the community.
And just one other point, after speaking to the one platform provider that we're really, focusing at the moment, another really great thing that I kind of found about this provider is that what all the surveys that will be in the registry, if you'd like, a combination of those surveys, it's called a data dictionary. So it's kind of a list, if you'd like, of questions and responses, whether they're mandatory, whether they're, whether they're identifiable or not, things like that. But basically the provider said that any questions that we think, and again, this committee will say here, are particularly important to the community. So when they're filling them in, back to what Chad says, and you can kind of see some different charts, pie charts, bar charts and things like that, we can mark them. And then they can basically allow themselves to generate those sort of graphical images for you guys. So it's not just going to be kind of random again. We're going to say, well, it is really important, demographics is really important. Mark those. Let's make sure some pie charts come out with that. What else is really important to the community? Okay, mark those. Let's make sure they can share in that. The back end is where basically the researchers and the sponsor and everybody, they can access the data, all of it. And that's where you really start to get down into the research and start analyzing it. And that's where you kind of think about publications, all that type of thing, advancing research. So there's different levels of accessing the data and perhaps different purposes as well.
And one thing I'd like to add is, even after you complete your first round of all your information, this is going to be something we need you to keep up, whether it's annually, however it's set up. If things change, we want you to get that in the information, so it's constantly updating where you are.
That's an important point.
And one just other sorry, quick comment on this topic, is that one of the things that we've thought about in terms of what patients can get out of it, so this would be more directly related to an individual patient's data, not necessarily related to aggregate data, but we have gotten feedback and seen other registries where patients input their information and then can get a printout, so that you can take that printout with you, and that becomes your medical history that you can bring with you to all your appointments. And so the more up to date you keep your information in the registry, the more the printout is helpful to you, hopefully, because then you don't have to kind of keep writing on, at least from my experience, writing on scratch papers and this and that and the other, but you have it all in one secure place that you can go back to. So another kind of way that patients can access and use their own data.
I think Dr. Orloff mentioned that you would hope to register 400 people a year for 3 years. And just a follow-up question, is the idea then that when you're on safe, certain ground, you would open the gates and everybody newly diagnosed would register?
Oh, that was by no means a limit. I don't think. I think that's. I think in order to kind of keep moving forward, I think that's kind of our goal. But no, I mean, so we talked about this. So in the first number of years, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be hopefully logging in, who are going to be somewhere in the middle of their journey. Ultimately, once we've backlogged, and this is going to be thousands of patients, then it'll be patients who are newly diagnosed. Or patients who are in the middle of their journey who just found out about the registry. But by no means was that 400 a upper level. I mean, if everyone died, so again, if we're talking about maybe there are 2,500 new cases, it would be great if the first year we got all 2,500 plus how many people are living in the U.S. with UM right now? Do we know? We don't know. So it would be great if the first year we had 15,000 people. I don't know if our current provider, is there a max? The day of launch. So the day of launch, it would be great if the system went down, because there's that many people who are logging on to. Yes, that would be great. We'll break the internet. That'd be awesome.
This is one great thing about these registry studies. I've worked in traditional research, and kind of like Richard said, there's silos, there's purposes for certain registries that tend to support other registry-specific research projects, whether it's a clinical trial, et cetera. The strength with these registries is that it is about bringing the whole community together. It's about telling everybody's stories as one, and that is global. We have to start here. We need to be, again, smart about what we're doing. But ultimately, the idea is, yes, you captured your entire patient community. That's where you're going to get your data. That's where you're going to help advance the research. So yeah, don't close the doors. Think more about how you're going to collaborate with every country. Like Sarah said, we already are talking with, Canada, UK, Australia, I think at one point we were talking to. And the idea is undoubtedly start opening it up and talking to them. And you're going to have specific things that are happening in those countries as well. And the great things about these registries is that you can adapt some of those questions in order to fit those situations. So you can branch off to, say, those that register from Canada. Okay, you've got your core data set. Well, maybe there's other specific questions that Canada may want to ask that's specific to their population. So that you can do that with these registries as well. The great thing is that accessibility, and the flexibility around these as well. But again, you got to be really smart about what you're doing and precise.
So it sounds to me like that this database is going to be generated from the patients. And of course, I understand there's patients going back many years, and we want to get them registered as quickly as possible. But is there going to be outreach to ocular oncologists and medical personnel to encourage patients they're seeing with ocular melanoma to get registered? Will doctors be able to begin that process?
So that's part of the outreach effort. We've been talking about this for a long time, but I think as Sarah can speak to this much better than I can, but there's a whole kind of branding campaign being planned in terms of how are we going to get the word out. So there's a logo that you will see soon. How are we going to speak to the patients and the providers? What's the website landing page going to be like? How are people going to find that? So that's all being developed, but it's really, really important. I think what's good is that we already have a lot of buy-in from the ocular oncologists. They already know about this, and most of the medical oncologists who see a lot of these patients. So right, it's a small community, which is good in some ways and bad in some ways, but the good is that we all kind of know.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that that a lot of this past year, I mean, we vetted this idea. I mean, a lot of what we've done over the past few years has been to bring all the stakeholders together, and so we see the clinicians and researchers as key stakeholders, obviously. And so, we reached out to a lot of people individually, one-on-one, before we even pulled the steering committee together, before we even formally sort of launched this effort at all, and just kind of got their general input. And then this past year, we've had a much more intensive effort to really kind of get the word out to the medical and research communities. As Rich said, we presented at 3 international scientific meetings over the past year on the registry specifically, and at one of them we actually spent an hour and a half doing focus groups with different stakeholders. So we've really been trying to get buy-in from those stakeholders for sure.
Yeah, and just 2 seconds. So I thought Rich might mention this, but he mentioned that there's an academic registry that hopefully will be up and running, would you say by the summer? And so there's a lot of participants who, are potentially participating in the academic registry who are also aware of this registry, and we're very much hoping that if a patient is enrolled on the academic registry by their provider, the provider will prompt them to enroll on the patient-reported registry, and then we're hoping that when you enroll in the patient-reported registry, there'll be a prompt to tell your provider to enroll you on the academic registry, and that patients will have a unique identifier that will actually link their stories between the both registries.